Hi there. My name is Ben Williams, and I'm a licensed Texas broker in the state of Texas. I've been licensed since 2015, and today I'm going to talk to you about the 1 to 4 family contract. I'm going to cover paragraphs 1 through 5 today. As I record this on, I believe it's October 12th, 2024. This is the current contract. Just for purposes as it's intended. This is not copyrighted. People are more than welcome to use this as a refresher or schools or whatever the case may be. I think it would be helpful for new agents, of course, and just really unpack some stuff. I'm going to share my experiences, and hopefully, this does come across to someone to help them in the big picture. That being said, let's jump into this. Um, we're going to talk about the TREC Form 2017 or the TXR 1601, the 1 to 4 family contract, residential contract for resales. Now, specify resale because if someone has lived in the house before and they're trying to resell it, that's what it means. Most builders have their own contracts, or there's another form for new contracts also in TREC as well. But for this case, we're talking about homes that's been lived in and someone's trying to sell it. It's used for residential properties, for a single family, duplex, triplex, or quadruplex. That's what this form is used for. It is not used for condominiums. As you see at the very top, it says not used for condominiums. Contracts, they have their own contract. So let's jump into this. For part one is just the parties. And the first person that goes in there is the seller. And then the second person or persons or entity or whatever fits the bill in this case is the buyer. In this case, is buyer is Joe Smo, and the seller is Rodolfo Rene. All right. So looking at that, now you could go extra step here and specify if there was 2 people or more. You could specify married. You could specify unmarried. You could have Joe Smo and Susie Smo, and they could be married, or Joe Smo and Susie Smo could be brothers and sisters. So you could specify that. Just helps title in the big picture if that's what you wanted to do, but it's not required to do that, but it is helpful. Now let's go into the property section 2. So section 2 starts off with identifying the legal description. You usually find this in a tax roll. I like to go to our tax roll and kind of see what the legal description is. I do not take what I see in the MLS as the gospel, if you will. Sometimes that can be incorrect, and so I want to go see it on the tax roll and see what that looks like. So, 2A, the lot, you put the lot number, of course, block number 89 in this case, and then whatever the legal description it has in that tax roll, you'll put there. Now you have there, it's in the city of El Paso, county of El Paso. Now you want to put the county because it's just where, everything's going to be recorded. So that's where you have to have the county there, because of course everything's going to be recorded. And of course, what is known as what you put in Google or your Google Maps is what is known as. Of course, if you want to put Lot 15, Block 89, Chela Vista Park, J1 replat into Google, you would not find that, and it would be very difficult for somebody to find. But the known as is what you all know of it and what we know of it, right? So 2B talks about the improvements. Now, I kind of had some experience with this, good and bad experiences with this. And in terms of what it really trying to tell you is that anything permanently installed or built in, attached to the property, is assumed to be part of the sale. Now, I always explain this to my clients, that it could be simply as this. In the way that this contract is written as though if there was TV mounts on the wall. Well, the TV mounts are mounted affixed to the wall inside of a house, or even outside the house, if for that, if you got a patio with something with TVs on the outside and it's mounted to the house. Well, this is saying that the TV mounts must stay with part of the sale, and the TVs can be taken with the potential seller, at closing. So if you think about it in that way, just really um, break that down. I had a situation where this gentleman had a pergola that was it was bolted to some concrete in his ground in the backyard, and he had told me, it's like, hey, I want to take my pergola. And I was a new agent. I had to learn the hard way, and it just didn't register me at the time. And at closing, he had taken the pergola, and the buyer had came, and it's like, okay, where's the pergola at? And they sent me uh, pictures of the boats being removed and the pergola being gone, and lo and behold, when it's all said and done, the buyers were adamant about having that pergola back there. And me being the listing agent at that time, and I didn't catch it, and the seller told me, and I was negligent in that part. um, I had to pay for a pergola. So obviously this conversation is very near and dear to my heart, because I don't like playing for stuff, but I had to pay for a pergola that day. And you know this would never ever happen to me again. So I try and share that with people to make sure that they understand what this really means. Now, what I should have done, is a um, good listing agent, I should have specified that the pergola didn't convey, and put in exclusions. As you can see down here, that's one of my examples that as we get down here. But that made me, of course, look at this paragraph totally different. So if you can learn through my mistakes, but it has several different things up there. It has appliances, it has balance, it has screens, it has antennas, mounts, brackets, television, speakers, heating and air conditioning units, security and fire detection equipment, wiring, plumbing, lighting fixtures, chandeliers, water softeners. They got a bunch of things there, and it spells it out. So read the contract, and it help you specify what are permanently installed and built-in items. I just really stress that upon you, especially if you're a new agent. Sometimes you just got to learn the hard way if we don't read the contract, and this is what this is about. So I hope this helps. Now, one of the things, let's go to 2C. 2C, well, back to 2B. 2B, it says up there, if you look, it does specify about appliances, right? Well, a blender is an appliance, but it's not affixed to the property. So there's certain appliances that are fixed to the property that we need to keep that there. You have, sometimes the um, microwaves are fixed up above the stove, and the dishwashers are fixed and attached to the countertops and stuff like that. That's supposed to stay. However, in the next paragraph, in accessories, one of the appliances that are assumed to stay regardless of what, and it's not really affixed to the property most times, is the stove. If you look here, the stove right there, and accessories, and it spells out this one particular appliance that stoves are supposed to stay regardless of what, and it's put as accessory. Now, if the stove is built in or something like that, right, it stays. But the stove has to stay anyway. That's what they're trying to really clarify in accessories. So if you look at the following accessories, these items are supposed to stay with the sale unless specified that they're not. And it has a list of things there: window air conditioning unit, stove, fire screens, curtains, rods, blinds, window shades, drapes, rods, door keys, mailbox keys, above a ground equipment for pools, and all of these different things, entry gates. It even goes on and talks about software, uh, and have the accessories for the software to be controlled for the improvements and things of that nature. So those are part of the sale, unless you exclude them, which is in section 2D. It says here, okay, the following improvements or accessories will be retained by the seller and must be removed prior to delivery of possession. In this case, I gave the example of TV mounts, and of course the pergola that I had to learn the hard way, um, and patio speakers. A lot of times you got those guys that got the patio speakers and they're really nice and they want to take that with them. So I just tell people that really understand that this is more about the conversation on the front end. Of course, with your sellers, if you're the listing agent, to talk about these things and make sure that you know they tell you, hey, look, what are you going to take, Mr. Seller? Or Mrs. Seller? And if so, I like to suggest, okay, before we even get started, if possible, let's take those items off and store them into the garage and say you're taking them, um, versus putting them on the market and those things are there. Now, if that's not possible, then it's okay. You just need to specify, in the confidential remarks and saying, hey, TV mounts and pergola and speakers in the backyard will not convey. And if you have that there as a good buyer's agent, you should communicate that with your buyer at the beginning of the offer and say, hey, look, TV mounts and pergola in the backyard and patio speakers do not convey. So uh, let's make sure we exclude those on the contract and specify here so we don't have that problem. So that's my suggestion in terms of paragraph 2, to really have that conversation on the front end as a seller, of course, as a listing agent, and as the buyer's agent. And it helps you out tremendously in this process so you don't get to closing where you have problems. All right. So just keep that in mind. All right. Let's go to section 3, the sales price. Now, in short, um, the first portion, 3A, is any cash portion that's going to be uh, payable at closing, being most times the down payment. And this varies from different loans and of that type. If it's a FHA loan, typically it's 3.5%. And then in this case, it's a FHA loan. We're going to get to that in a second, but typically it's 3.5% on an FHA loan. So in this case, the sales price being $375,000. If you did 3.5% down, that would be 13,125. So 13,125 is the cash price because that's 3.5% down. Then the remaining amount in B, what's going to be financed, in this case is $361,875. That amount needs to go in B. Now remember, A plus B equals C. Okay, so keep that in mind in terms of what this looks like. So whatever portion that the buyer is putting down, that's what goes there, right? And then whatever's being financed goes in B, and it should equal to C. Now you have to specify in B, what type of financing is going to be. Third party financing, it's going to be a loan assumption addendum, or it's going to be a seller financing addendum. Whichever applies in the terms of financing, you would check off that particular block. All right. And then, of course, that still adds sum of A and B equals C. Now, let's go with, typically VA loans. VA loans don't have no money down. So in the cash portion for A, it would be 0, right? And then the sum of financing, which would in this case would be $375,000, that would be in B, and A plus B equals C, and that still equals $375,000. So I hope everybody gets that in that portion of how that really works, and take away with whatever this goes with, whatever fits. Okay. Now let's go and jump into section 4. Section 4 is about leases, and this is coming on rapidly because a lot of different times, before they changed this contract, there was no one addressed leases, and we kind of did this half concoct agreement about leases, and I'm so happy that they put this in there. So that being said, look at this. If there's any type of residential lease on the property, um, let's say you have a buyer. The buyer is wanting to buy this house, and the seller is an investor, and they got a 6-month lease still in place. And the buyer's thinking, hey, I'm gonna buy this house. I'm gonna move in it. and they don't know about the 6-month lease that's in place. Well, the way this works, Texas property code, the lease supersedes a sale. So the renter has a right to fulfill that lease for 6 months. And that's just the way um, Texas real estate is. That's just the laws, right? So, in regards to that, if there is a current lease, what this is saying, if you check that, well, the lease has to be provided to the potential buyer, and you're notifying the buyer that there is a lease, and hey, even telling them, hey, it's 6 months into this process. Now, hopefully, as a good listing agent, the listing agents probably put something about homes available at a certain time. But if there is any current lease on the property, the buyer is entitled to know what that lease, the parameters of that lease, and how that lease is everything. That's what that's about. Another growing thing is Section B about fixture leases. And fixture leases really have to tame with any type of fixture that has a lease on it. Um, Really, this has really come out because of the solar panel issues. We've had pain with solar panels. And, I understand that, people are, purchasing solar panels, going green and things of that nature, but it tends to be thorn in the side when you go to sell your property, because a lot of times the way it's formed, um, either people can't pay them off at closing or something like that, and the buyer has to take over or something like that, or something of that nature. But in this case, if there's a lease on the solar panels or propane tanks or water softeners or anything of that nature, then you have to inform the buyer of that, and the buyer needs to, either qualify for this lease and things of that nature, and take over this payment, and the buyer needs to know what that looks like and what they're getting to before going into contract. I always suggest with my agents that let's get this ironed out during the option period, all right, and make sure the buyer can qualify and do everything with the lease with the leasing company before the option period ends. Because if something happens where they can't, and it's after the option period, it tends to be a problem. So this is always some of those things that I look at, in my eyes, about how long the option period and things of that nature. If I have fixture leases involved, I tend to try and get a longer option period to make sure I can get that stuff ironed out before the option period ends. All right. And then not too common, at least in our area, in our market, we don't have anything a lot of times about natural resource leases. But if there was some form of natural resource lease, you would check that off, and the buyer is entitled to get a copy of that natural resource lease. All right. So that's the basis of paragraph 4. And it's a whole lot there, but it really makes sure that the buyer is getting informed about any potential leases on the property before they purchase it. Okay, let's move on into section 5. Um, section 5. Well, before I go into section 5, at the very top of the page, I forgot something. At the very bottom of every page, there's the buyer's and seller's initials. All right. So in this case, this is a multiple page contract. And if you're missing a initial, or you're missing anything like that, um, it the contract is not valid. I mean, if you miss an initial saying, okay, that the buyer didn't acknowledge it and the seller didn't acknowledge it in some way on this one page, then this is a kind of a voided contract. So since you want to ensure that you get the initials on every page, that's really critical. If you're doing this old school type of way and you're just going out and you're writing this out, that's when I see mistakes. But if it's being done digitally, most time these digital software is gonna make sure everything's signed in the right appropriate block, right? So I want to make sure I pay attention to that too. Okay, second page. At the very top of the second page, you have the address of the property, and it tells you, hey, what page we're on. This is going to be page 2 of 11 in this case, right? You want to make sure that is filled out and have the address up there. Section 5. Section 5 is all about earnest money and termination option. Okay. In short, it states here, delivery of the earnest money and option fee must be within 3 days of the effective date. The effective date of which the executed date or effective date, or whatever you want to call it, the date that this goes in effect. Says, okay, hey, in this case, buyer must deliver to, in this case, Sierra Title. It says escrow agent. Escrow agent means the title office. It's not the you know Julie Smo in the title company. That's the escrow officer, right? It's the escrow agent is the actual title company. So I see that that's often done very wrong. At least in my opinion, the way I've been taught, this always the escrow agent is the escrow um, office itself, and then you get the address. All right, like a lot of times people says, okay, what's the address, and the listing agents don't put it in there. Well, Google it. All right, just Google and find out what it is. All right. In this case, the earnest money. Earnest money is, good faith money, money that shows that you're serious, shows the seller that you're serious about buying. Is typically up to 1% of the sale. All right, and that's what I've seen it. Typically consistent about 1%, can be, and then it says here the option fee of $200. Now, typically in our market here, we see it anywhere between 50 to 200 bucks. That's very common here. I had a situation a long time ago. It was weird where a gentleman wanted $4,000 in option fee, and it was such a critical amount because there's no way, there's no situation where a buyer option money is returned to them, and they had a seller that was pretty adamant about a 4,000 option fee. um, it was a multi-million dollar home, but they felt like, hey, if they had to take it off for this long or whatever, that they wanted to get something out of it. And it really, it was crazy, really crazy situation. And luckily, the um, lucky that happened in a way that it still turned out to be okay. Okay, still turned out to be okay. Now let's keep on going. Option money is typically up to $200 in our market. Earnest money up to 1% in our market. I think that's pretty typical across the state of Texas. It also goes in here, talks about additional earnest money here, right? Um, so I've only seen additional earnest money used in on the initial contract. I've seen additional earnest money further on because people want to extend the contract and things of that nature, extend the option period, stuff like that. But in the initial phase of the contract, personally, I've only seen where investors come in and they're like, okay, hey, we want this 10-day option period, but we don't want to give any earnest money until the 10th day. And they'll, you know, won't put anything up in the initial spot where it says 3750. They'll put zero there. They'll still pay the $200 option fee, but then down here in section 1 they would put the 3750 in this additional earnest monies, and they would put the number of days for the freaking option period being 7 or 10 days, whatever that looks like. In this case, 7 days. They would put 7 days here, so that would enable them not to really put any money up front, until they've had their option period and know they're going forward. That's the only time I've really seen it on the front end of the contract. Uh, Typically, I've seen it just the way you see it here on the screen, but that is a tactic or technique or procedures that some investors usually use sometime to make sure they don't put much money up front until they know that they're really going to purchase the property. That's what I've just seen. All right. Now, if the last day of the earnest money, option money, or additional earnest money falls on a weekend or holiday, the time to deliver is extended to the next day that is not a weekend or holiday. All right, so just remember that. So if you have the 3 days you have to get in and it falls on a Saturday or Sunday, then if Monday's not a holiday or anything like that, then that's extended over to Monday. All right, so keep that in mind. Um, Now it goes on to explain this paragraph that says any monies received is applied towards the option fee first and then earnest money. So in this case, you have 3750 and $200 that equates to 3950. So let's just say your buyer goes to Sierra Title and only turns in 3750, and they're thinking they're turning in the earnest money. Well, of that 3750 that they turned in, well, the first $200 of the 3750 would be applied to the earnest money first. So they would only have 3550 of the 3750 towards earnest money, meaning that the earnest money is short. So it's really critical to explain this to your buyers to make sure they understand exactly what has to be turned in. Hopefully, if you're full service and everything that you're doing leasing the way I teach, is that hey, Mr. Buyer, hey, bring that 3950 to the office, or I'll meet you to get that 3950, and I'm gonna written out to the title company, and whatever form you want to do, check or cashier's check, whatever, and I'll take that up to the title company and I'll turn it into you and make sure everything's right and give you a receipt, Mr. Buyer. That's the way I would prefer that you do it, in my way of looking. But if you can't, and there's people's doing things, they're wiring or doing whatever that looks like, and that happens, then you must really explain to your buyer that they need to have the full amount wired to the title company of the 3950 in this case. And if they are short anything of that, then they're in breach. They haven't turned in the earnest money, right? So, because failure to deliver the earnest money enables the seller to terminate. If you look at section, I know it's in here somewhere. It says, okay, hey, it's right here. Down at the bottom here, it says 5C. Failure to timely deliver earnest money. The buyer fails to deliver its earnest money within the time required. Seller may terminate the contract or exercise remedies under paragraph 15, or both, by providing notice to the buyer before the buyer delivers earnest money. All right. So if earnest money is short, then buyer's in breach, and the seller could terminate the contract, as it says there. All right. So keep that in mind. So make sure people understand that. Secondly, let's go into paragraph B, termination option. Says for nominal consideration, the receipt of the seller acknowledged and the buyer agreement to pay the option fee within the time required. Seller grants the buyer unrestricted right to terminate this contract by giving notice of the termination to the seller within 7 days after the effective date of the contract. Option period. Notices under this paragraph must be given by 5 p.m. local time wherever the property is located by the date specified. Now, this is the only time in the contract it has a actual time line of 5 p.m. There's no other place other than that they're going to put that into the contract. So in this case, with the option fee, and the option fee giving the buyer the unrestricted right to terminate, they can wake up one morning, I don't like this, I want out. In order to be able to do that, then they have to pay this fee, and they have to pay this fee within the 3 days after the effective date, right? If they fail to deliver the option money, all right, if no dollar amount is stated in the option fee, or if the buyer fails to deliver the option fee within the time required, the buyer does not have the unrestricted right to terminate. So it's really critical about this. Time is of the essence to make sure that all these things happen within that timelines, because if they don't have the unrestricted right to terminate and they thought they did, it could be a problem if they want to go back out afterwards, and it could come down to um, you know, paragraph 15 and handling things that way. Um, the other thing I would include in this paragraph that's really crazy is I want to talk about 5C again, and 5C about the earnest money. Been in situations where the buyer did not deliver the earnest money on time within the 3 days. And of course, the seller was in a position to terminate, right? Because they didn't deliver on time. However, day 4 went by, day 5 went by, the seller didn't terminate. They had the option to terminate, but they didn't. But day 6, buyer turns in the earnest money. So at that point in time, the seller's back into the performance of that contract and doesn't have the right to terminate after day 6 because they did deliver the earnest money. So there's a little bubble there between, hey, they didn't turn on day 3, but they turned in day 6. The seller's right to terminate only happened in between that time, and they did not do that. They didn't send written notice to the buyer that they terminated, and they didn't do that. And then day 6, the buyer turned it in. Well, kind of back into the performance of the contract based on what it's saying there. And then you can't sit there and say later on day 30, just because you didn't turn it in between um, before day 3, and the buyer turned it in on day 6, you can't sit there at day 30 and say, oh, I'm going to terminate now, just to give you that right to do that. So there's only a small gap there if that does happen. So keep that in mind too. I've seen situations where people tried that and it just doesn't work. And I even think it says in the paragraph, if you go down here at the very bottom here, it says if buyer fails to deliver the earnest money within the time required, seller may terminate this contract or exercise seller's remedies under the paragraph 15 or both by providing notice to the buyer, begin termination, before buyer delivers the earnest money. So keep that in mind. That's one of those paragraphs that's kind of like, does that give you like a get out of jail free card or something like that the whole time, but just because they didn't turn it in time on the third day by 3 days? Not really, because if the buyer did turn it in on the 4th day or 5th day or whatever case may be, and you didn't terminate between that time, then Mr. Seller is locked into the contract. All right, and last but not least, it has here time is of the essence for this paragraph. Strict compliance with this time is performed is required. So just keep that in mind. So this is paragraphs 1 through 5. I'm going to pick up with paragraph 6 on my next tutorial here, and paragraph 6 is going to be a doozy. See you.